You must be saying, this all sounds great, but why doesn't then the majority think in a systemic way? If you did your homework from the previous episode where I've asked you to try to implement our systems-focused visioning tools into your daily life, you might have found it more challenging to apply them than you would have thought. In reality, it's quite hard to shake off the normal, non-systemic and linear way of operating, and there is a reason for that. When we enter this world, everything in our human culture already operates in a mechanistic way, including our industries, our institutions, our economy, our politics. Yet that is only due to science forming and concretizing this particular interpretation of the world. Without our direct awareness of it, the 15th to 17th century development of the particular direction for scientific thought has shaped how we in the Western civilization understand the world and how we unconsciously operate within our culture and our social spheres, guiding ourselves by understanding that is not necessarily fully complete or inclusive in its perception. By beginning to understand certain historic origins of the worldview that still influences our collective understanding of the world, we can begin to dismantle those ways of knowing and start replacing them with knowledge and approaches that are actually serving us by being more reflective of reality of nature. You see, before 1500, the dominant worldview was organic. People lived in small cohesive communities and experienced nature through cultivation of personal relationships with it. Their spiritual and material concerns were interdependent, and needs of the community were prioritized above the needs of the individual. The science of that time was mainly aimed to understand the spiritual meaning and significance of things, rather than prediction and control. Yet quite a strong meteoric line of scientific thought development starting from mid-15th century has completely shifted that perspective. Thinkers began a rapid chain of thought establishment by basing their development on one another. This caused a domino effect of a binary, mechanistic worldview where man began to see himself as separate from nature. And indeed, it's exactly this kind of thinking that sure did bring us a lot of progress, but on the other hand has also served as the direct cause for the multiplicity of crises of our present. Galileo was one of the first thinkers to separate science from the rest of reality. He offered a program of a dead world where only properties that could be measured and were quantifiable deserved any attention. Galileo advocated for full abolishment of all forms of knowledge that came previously, including indigenous, traditional, spiritual, and nature knowledge. Galileo's view was even further promoted by English philosopher Francis Bacon. His writings portray nature as a female that needs to be controlled, dominated, and abused. This, of course, is strongly connected to the social position of women at that time and to how women suspected of witchcraft were tortured by complex mechanical devices. Bacon wrote that nature holds secrets locked in her bosom and suggested that nature has to be shaken to her foundations and she would have to be forcibly penetrated in order to discover the truth. He offered to bind her to your service and make her your slave. This violent sexual imagery of penetrating, torturing, and enslaving Mother Nature should not be dismissed as just figures of speech. The subordination of women and ruthless acquirement of power was an essential component of the elite thinkers' worldview, along with ongoing development of slavery, all of which was entirely committed to maintaining prestige of white male dominance in a patriarchal, unequal society. It needs to be acknowledged that our modern science is not born in innocence. In its origination, it cannot be viewed separate from a particular bias, a bias that is ruthless, sexist, exclusionist, racist, monarchical, and privileged. Unfortunately, due to the popularity of this empirical inductive methodology within elitist scientific and thinker circles, the ancient concept of the earth as a nurturing mother was completely transformed into the one that is mechanistic and abusive, turning science into an extractive domain that it still is up to this day. After Bacon came Descartes, who with his highly analytical focus and his famous view, "I think, therefore I exist," was highly influential in promoting the reductionism in science through his belief that all aspects of complex phenomena can be understood by reducing them to their smallest constituent parts. that can be then arranged in a logical linear order, completely stripping away any space for the study of relationships and their complexity. Now, though, we know that scientific description of natural phenomena can't be completely accurate or exhaustive. Cartesian thought further advocated the separation and prioritization of mind, aka the thinking thing, to everything else, aka the extended thing, which further added to the separatist view of the relationship between the human and universe, where nature worked as a machine according to exact mechanical laws defined by humans. Although this mechanistic approach was successful and efficient in propelling the movement forwards with scientific discovery and research up to the present day, unfortunately it did encourage many scientists to think of living organisms as machines and nothing but machines. The next big brain that came was Newton, who further developed Cartesian thought and created advanced formulations to further explain the universe as one huge mechanical system that operates according to the exact mathematical laws. Even though quite a few aspects of his theories have been now proven wrong, the legacy of his work on the perception of the world has been dramatic. His beliefs spread rapidly among the middle classes of the 18th century and inspired a whole era called the Age of Enlightenment. The thought behind the movement was that mankind could use reason to discover the laws of the world. Enlightenment was the starting point for the development of capitalism, with its promotion of property rights and free markets, along with prioritization of individualism over community. This was the turning point in history for concretization of the extractivism and growth-focused linear models that are still prevalent in our world today. Furthermore, Enlightenment's obsession with reason and belief in solely one form of westernized knowledge have created the ambition to save all souls and help the unknowing ones, which activated a time of great violence and, most importantly, further propelled the colonization of the world. Colonization and the domination of scientific thought caused one of the greatest thefts in history: the silent violence of epistemicide. Epistemicide is a scientific destruction of any indigenous and traditional knowledge that doesn't match or fit into the worldview framework that is defined by the destroying oppressor. This is created through total disregard and marginalization of knowledge, as well as its erasure and imposed forgetting through forcing homogenized education on the community and children that is not acknowledging or accepting these cultures' own knowledge and traditions. As you can see from the short introduction, prioritization of one particular direction for the development of science has totally shaped how we understand the world and took us further away from seeing through systems thinking perspective, which is much closer to the removed indigenous and pre-colonial forms of knowledge. You see, in the Middle Ages, the organic worldview and ecological-minded behavior protected the earth. The image of the earth as a living organism and nurturing mother served as a cultural constraint, restricting the actions of human beings. One does not readily slay a mother, dig into her entrails for gold, or mutilate her body. As long as the earth was considered to be alive and sensitive, it could be considered a breach of human ethical behavior to carry out destructive acts against it. These cultural constraints completely dispersed as the mechanization of science took place. The Cartesian view of the universe as a mechanical system provided a scientific sanction for the manipulation and exploitation of nature that became typical of modern civilization. Once we begin to unravel these narratives and start noticing where does our knowledge by which we orientate our life come from, we can begin to see the structures of power that create our reality for us, and instead of giving in, we can start to identify and change these beliefs. Systems thinking is of great help with that, but more on that in the next episode. The cards to ponder on from this episode are science, control, reductionism, elitism, progress, extractivism, machine, separation, westernization, and epistemicide. And here is a goodbye question for you. What beliefs do you hold about nature and society? Can you trace them back to where they have come from in your life? Be honest here. How often in your day-to-day life do you question them? Answers to these questions will prepare us for some further explorations in the next episode. See you then!